Hello. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2019 annual lecture of Prisoners Advice Service, which is generously hosted by Reed Smith. So thank you very much to Reed Smith. My name is Lucy Rhodes, and I'm one of 9 trustees of PAS. And my background is in charity and governance law, but obviously I'm learning a lot about prison law as I'm going along. And I think probably I'm preaching to the converted. It sounds like everyone knows each other from the chatting that was going on earlier. But for those of you who don't know PAS and what we do, PAS responds to calls for help from prisoners and gives advice and information in relation to their rights and their treatment in prison, and takes action where the situation calls for it. And we do that in a number of ways. So we have a telephone advice line, we have letters clinics, and we have outreach in prisons. So that's just a few examples. And more recently, we've produced a series of self-help toolkits, thanks to one of our donors, which has been a really amazing resource in prison libraries. I think Lubia, our managing solicitor, is going to speak a little bit more about what we've been up to recently later on. So I'm going to skip straight to our programme, which is what you're all here for, not to hear what I've got to say. And we're really lucky to have Marcia Willis Stewart QC with us tonight to talk about the topic surviving the law, supporting prisoners and those detained. Can there be a holistic approach? Marcia is a managing partner at Birnberg Peirce Solicitors and a civil liberties champion who has fought for the rights of many individuals and families, including those of Jean Charles de Menezes, Mark Duggan, the victims of the Hillsborough disasters, and is currently emerged in the Grenfell inquiry. So we're really lucky to have her here tonight. Marcia is an outstanding lawyer, and I know that because she's won an award called the Outstanding Lawyer Award. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here with us. Thank you very much for sparing the time. And sandwiching Marcia's talk, we have 2 very special guests. First, Kelly Roberts, an emerging artist and part of the spoken word collective called Shutdown. Kelly has performed her poetry at various venues around London, including the Roundhouse. And I was actually there just a couple of weeks ago. I was coerced to a heavy metal gig, which is not my style of music. So I'm really pleased to hear that the Roundhouse is carrying out some other good work. And after Marcia, who will come next, we'll hear from Brenda Borowski, also known as Lady Unchained, a poet from South East London who started writing in prison while serving a prison sentence. Brenda was unaware that she was writing poetry at the time. As she said, it was just her way of staying out of trouble, and something I learned was very easy to do in prison. Now she uses poetry to help others share their stories and prove that there is life after prison. An inspirational message and very fitting for tonight's topic. I'll now hand over to Kelly.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to share with you a poem that I've written about police brutality. It's written from the only perspective that I know. Stop, don't run, succumb to the power of state patrolling the slum walls, seeking out those destined for a slippery slope mischief trip, fall into the tight grip of incarceration, dragged along bars to harden, then infected with the incriminating poison. Decaying bouquets and candle wax seize into Kingsland's concrete. Chocolate loiterers congregate outside corner shops like vultures, finding refuge on the sides of pavements, intimidating pedestrians with words unspoken. I used to know a girl displaced in a tower block maze, brown with curls. She wore gold in her teeth, skin thick and seasoned like meat, smoking cigarettes in stairwells, littering the estate with the butts of her broken dreams. In the hood, she would chill with the man them posted up on the block. In a manner, the siren would sound a warning shot. Blue lights flicker in sight, scatter when they come, run, fled, I see, fed. I see one male taken to reprimand a brother, then another. I see them ambush a father, a son, a human being, but he was vexed and must have resisted arrest. Face slammed into the floor, teeth crushed against tiles, dirt cold. Don't move or make a sound. He wouldn't want to be sent downtown in a body bag. Don't breathe, it might be his last breath. Respect the authority or be tackled with blunt violence and no accountability, finding a knee pressed up against the chest. Pressure tugging tight at the neck. It's protocol. This is how they serve to protect and keep us in check. Mothers of the minority bleed tsunami tears from the bearing of their womb, lying lifeless above scarlet pools, washing away the trauma from a world desensitized to black death. The brown girl's eyes raged red. She cried, another black body dead. He died after being racially profiled, and justice was never London met. Death his penalty. Another black body made victim of police brutality. Excessive and unnecessary force is used 139 times a day in London. Stopped and searched 4 times more likely to be a suspect of carrying a sharp object. A genetic target capsized by life, then tossed in the pen because society never accounted for them. You see, the brown girl would never think to commit a crime, but still fear doing the time as the stigma resides on the surface of her skin. Even when innocent, she could be taken in, sat at the back of a cop car, because nothing ain't changed, star. The prejudice is still alive and it thrives in the prison system, penalizing a generation, suffocating at the wrist by silver bracelets that only shine behind their backs. The brown girl is left with silent screams, spending the day with her 5-year-old niece. Siren sounds. It's the police. Her niece sinks into her arms and repeats, I'm scared of the police. The brown girl then knew the fear ran deep. Does a 5-year-old white child have the same fear of the police growing up on London streets? Thank you, guys.
Well, good evening all. I'm not sure I can match that. Do you want to come back, Kelly? When I was asked to speak today, clearly I said yes, but I will admit to some degree of trepidation. My experience over the years in the quest for CPD points, especially at this time of year, has been often when one lawyer addresses another lawyer, or other lawyers address other lawyers, we end up hearing only our voices, and we risk merely reinforcing our own particular views. We can quite easily forget that there is a world outside the legal community with different thoughts, different methodologies, and priorities. I will admit to having sat through a number of those learned loyalist speeches, one eye on my watch, wondering how many minutes more to go till I could get a quick getaway. So to be honest, when I'm asked to speak to lawyers, I usually decline. For a number of reasons, however, how could I refuse Lubia and PAS? Not a law firm. It's a not-for-profit organisation, and I've been schooled in the ethos of not-for-profits and the voluntary sectors. It's in my DNA. For me, PAS has a reach beyond the narrow exercise of undertaking law. It provides overarching support and assistance to those in prison that traditional prison law departments simply cannot do, especially given the funding landmines. And of course, PAS also has a particularly impressive record of taking on volunteers, often from what we, the so-called human rights lawyers, say, the non-traditional backgrounds, and providing them with a superb training ready for me and others like me to poach. So what I'm going to explore this evening is not any particular aspect of prison law itself. You probably all know far more about that than I do. But to think about some of the ways in which we and our clients can survive the challenges which they and we are faced with. So, what are those challenges? I, of course, wanted to make sure that I was still understanding what was going on in the prison world, and so I spoke to some of those whom I've poached. And I'm still there. I jotted down a few of what seemed to me to be some of the most pressing and obvious issues. 1, being able to care for family and have contact with them while inside. Being able to make some use of the time in prison by gaining an education or volunteering or learning a skill. Being able to hold a sense of self, for example, as simple as having possessions that you can keep when you get moved around the block or to other prisons, getting back out as soon as possible. And if wrongly convicted, having access to the basic tools to try to obtain justice, i.e. computers, pens and paper. Once inside, this is a major issue. Being able to keep your dignity and being treated as humans, how you're addressed, the tone of conversation, to access basic sustenance, medicine, and above all, to be afforded equal treatment regardless of gender, race, sexuality, or other defining characteristics. Being taken seriously and not ignored when reporting problems such as feeling physically or mentally unwell. Being able to have social relationships and a sense of community with others. These are just a few of the things that occurred to me, and I'm sure that those in this room, all of you, can add countless others. Some of these challenges can only really be met by the provision of proper resources, and probably through a thorough overhaul of the entire system. But is that likely to happen? But there are some that perhaps we can try to do something about within the parameters of what is currently available to us. I mentioned earlier the voluntary sector and not-for-profit organisations. Now, while we know that many have gone under and no longer exist, do you know what's still out there? Do we lawyers know which organisations, be they not-for-profit or government-funded, can provide assistance and resource? Or do we simply rely or limit ourselves to knowing which law firm deals with what? Worse still, do we send the poor paralegal off to rustle through the latest edition of Chambers or Legal 500 to find a lawyer? In thinking about how some of these challenges can be dealt with, I have looked at my own practice. And within our practice, as a core element, we consider how we can use our knowledge and the knowledge from other disciplines to help our clients and ourselves to survive their encounters with the law, whether it be in the form of litigation or engagement with other legal processes. Let's face it, most, if not all, involvement with the law is stressful. Make no mistake, even if you're engaging in something which of itself will have a positive outcome, of its very nature, the law is something we don't get involved in unless there's something that needs resolution. And for those in prison and detained, this then creates an additional layer of disadvantage. For many, they have already been resolved. Whether justifiable or not, they've already experienced the full effect of the law upon them. So for me, a starting point is recognizing how powerless or powerful clients might present and the inherent vulnerability of those positions. And these imbalances and vulnerabilities are doubly so for the imprisoned and detained. Over the years, I've worked not only with adults sentenced to terms of imprisonment or interned indefinitely, but also children and young people caught up in immigration detention. I remember in particular the A family, Kurdish children who were detained for 18 months. They were minors, and they were forced to be in detention until they were returned to Germany. The compensation they received much later on for that wrongful detention may have provided some form of recognition of the wrong they suffered, but it could never ever redress the harm and lifelong damage. For me, their case was one that exemplified the limitations of what the narrow process of litigation can do to fix things, and why we need to think beyond if we are to provide holistic help that actually makes long-standing differences. So the imprisoned, the detained, and many others whom we see, faced with complex systems made up of labyrinthine statutes and regulations with which they have little or no familiarity, and above all, faced with the granite face of the state, telling them the computer says no, or more particularly, the computer says no to you. We all know how we feel when the computer says no, how powerless. And to add to that, layers of disempowerment that come with belonging to any community that is poor, marginalised, or in any way disenfranchised. And that, as we understand, is where the vast majority of the prison population comes from, and you have a greater power imbalance still. And in addition, if that wasn't enough, the trauma suffered by family members and loved ones in the ripples of trauma that echo out into the affected communities, and you have a pretty toxic mix. So when we, as lawyers, take on the role of acting for individuals whose liberty has been curtailed, if we are to serve them properly, to do them justice, we cannot just be black-letter lawyers, relying on well-established principles, precedents, cases and procedures. We have to be much more than that, and we have to do much more than that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not for a minute suggesting that the black-letter law isn't important. I know some very good black-letter lawyers, and where would we be without them? Challenges to the state when it oversteps the mark or acts unlawfully are the bedrock upon which everything else we do stands. But what I would say to those who consider that our role or objective should simply be to enable our clients to get the best result from whatever legal process they're involved in, that may be fine for you, but it's not for me. Because frankly, I don't think it's that simple. So I do try to encourage my team, and I would encourage you to work in a holistic way, dare I say, a therapeutic way. Try to deal with the person and the issues they bring, not just their presenting problem. Try to remember that there is no us and them, that our clients aren't a separate species, and that there is sometimes more than a mere fag paper, or Rizzler to some of you, width between the chances that have given us our lives and those that have shaped the lives of our clients. I confess that I do despair, or indeed with other professionals who see their clients as through a long telescopic lens. That sense of innate entitlement and superiority doesn't go unnoticed. And even though clients may not articulate it, you can be damn sure they feel it. It's not nice. Of course, we all have encountered angry, defensive clients who tell us that we're just in it for the money, who tax our reserves of patience and understanding to sometimes and beyond the limit. But when we do, rather than retreating into a mentality where we are the other and the problem, I think we have to tap into our emotions and humanity. This isn't being unbounded or about getting too close. It's about finding the delicate balance between objectivity and empathy. Not easy. And the trouble is, there's absolutely nothing in our training to prepare us for this role. So many of us learn as we go along, and as amateurs, we sometimes make mistakes. Whatever we call it, though, there is no doubt in my mind that much of what we do when we engage with our clients is close to, if not actually, therapy. If it all sounds a bit pompous, think of it this way. If someone is marginalized, excluded, and as it were, on the wrong side of the law, you can bet that they haven't spent much time being listened to or treated with respect. Sometimes the lawyer, and by this I mean solicitor, caseworker, advisor, is the first person who actually hears them or takes time out to take them seriously. It doesn't matter if the purpose of listening is to get coherent instructions and not pastoral. The act of listening and of being listened to can be therapeutic and is valuable. What then happens as we move through a case with our clients is that we build up a relationship of trust with them. They may have to tell us things that they have told no one, and which leave them emotionally exposed and raw. We may have to challenge the narratives they give, sometimes very robustly, while still recognizing the solicitor-client relationship and maintaining that boundary. Sometimes, of course, a client may feel that they cannot or sustain or carry on with you being their advisor. And as difficult as this might be, care has to be taken to restore and or indeed respect the end of that relationship. So in many ways, much of what we do is actually not so different from some of the work that goes on in counselling and therapeutic consulting rooms. Except, of course, when we do it, it isn't overt. It doesn't have a name, and it all goes on without anyone having signed up to be in therapy or to be the counsellor or the therapist. Neither we nor the client are in control of that. So I guess where this takes me is so that I've had to recognise and acknowledge the part of the role that we play that goes well beyond representation, and that the very act of listening and engaging can be empowering. I'm fortunate that in the environment that my colleagues and I work in, we endeavour to work in this way. And I guess what I'm really wanting to say, that this stuff is important and we shouldn't be embarrassed, nor should we minimise the part it can play in getting our clients the best outcomes. It may be a soft skill, but make no mistake, it is a skill and a very valuable one indeed. The flip side is that whether we are dealing with the stories of those who are denied access to even basic health or welfare services, or have been held in conditions that beggar belief, or those in the wider community of the disempowered, we hear vast quantities of distressing information, and we find ourselves absorbing huge amounts of distress, upset and pain. I'm constantly reminding myself and colleagues that we should never underestimate the toll that this takes, nor the need to take proper care of ourselves, other than going out and getting sloshed, which is of course sometimes the traditional remedy. So, in my practice, I sometimes bring in psychotherapeutic practitioners and counsellors to speak to our teams, both in groups to think about techniques to deal with the material they have to digest, and one-to-one to address specific issues. I know it might sound a bit touchy-feely, but although some colleagues have been a bit squeamish to begin with, I haven't yet had anyone tell me it's a bad idea, and I've had plenty tell me it's helped. So I think it's worth doing, even if for us it's just on a purely economic basis, to help avoid stress-related sickness and burnt out. Now, while I was thinking of what to say today about how to survive the law and how it impacts on and is used in particular when dealing with people from marginalised communities, I came across a 2018 judgment in a case about the use of parliamentary privilege. It starts off like this. The parliamentarian Sir John Eliot met his end by way of microbe rather than the judicial axe. The cause of his demise from consumption in 1632 at the Tower of London was nonetheless oppression by the Crown. The judgment goes on to consider whether or not social workers criticised in a report could sue if it was Parliament that published the report and it was Parliament, therefore free speech, and it was therefore free speech in Parliament. It's a fascinating read and can be found, I've got the case if you want, and the reference. And what it got me thinking about was the way our whole legal system relies on precedent and how many current decisions have their basis in those made not just decades ago, but centuries ago. And by extension, how those decisions impact on us all now, and if they should be allowed to. Why is it that we accept as more or less immutable that it is okay for current judicial decisions to be made on the basis of things that happened so long ago that the social circumstances that pertained then bear no resemblance to those that pertain today? And if it is correct that those cases do hold good beyond the times and circumstances in which they were conceived, because there is an unbroken legal thread back to them, then why shouldn't we, and why shouldn't our clients as individuals and members of specific communities also reach back in time and insist that our histories and backgrounds, to which there is an equally unbroken thread, be considered and given due weight when we are the subject or involved in legal proceedings today? I was reminded of the concept of post-traumatic slavery syndrome, posited by the American academic Dr. Joy DeGroy, whereby the traumatic experiences of those long dead echoes down the generation and places its imprint on us today. When one looks at the significant number of adults who are the victims of institutional and historic abuse within the care and mental health and prison system, there is undoubtedly a high incidence of continued cycles of trauma passing from one generation to the other. Consider the position of so many young black men who fall foul of the criminal justice system or who are pathologized but poorly treated within the mental health system, or more likely in both the prison and the mental health system. Some are second, third, fourth, 15th, fifth, umpteenth generation immigrants. Our system doesn't think of them as other in the sense of having another culture to which attention should perhaps be paid, but it does often treat them as lesser. I wondered, should they be entitled to have the circumstances of their ancestry considered? Should the system that judges them not factor in the impact of that oppression down the generations? So where the establishment can still make use of the echoes of centuries and decades long past as a basis to justify its decision-making, its behaviour, why should that not be the same for those who find themselves at the sharp end of the same establishment now? I don't pretend to have a clear answer to this, but it seems to me that it's a question worth asking. And although I have no doubt that the establishment will not want to hear it, it is perhaps incumbent on us, when we make the case for our clients, whether for their acquittal or sentencing or in respect of their release, to insist that more is done to place their individual circumstances solidly within the context not only of their individual but also their histories. I accept that this is probably rather esoteric to be considered as a practical remedy day to day, but nonetheless, thinking how to change a whole landscape of what is and isn't relevant is, I think, something that needs to be looked at in the longer term. In a similar vein, as well as going on about the historical context, I think that part and parcel of ensuring that those we work for and with are treated with proper respect and dignity is about language, the language we use, and the language we can encourage others to use. Language can be a very powerful tool to try to shift people's thinking. If we keep using dehumanizing terminology, people stay dehumanized. But if you use a different lexicon, it can eventually change the way those in power speak, and perhaps eventually even the way they think. For example, calling someone a slave is derogatory and dehumanizing. Calling them enslaved simply describes what has befallen them. Similarly, I think we need to be careful about using dehumanizing language in the context of those who have lost their liberty. Maybe, rather than using prisoner or detainee, we should be saying imprisoned or detained. Surely what has happened to them ought not to be the sum total of their identities. And if we are creative and careful about our use of language, if we frame what we say to and about our clients in a way that denotes equality and respect, perhaps maybe, just maybe, we might start nudging others in prisons and probation and government to follow suit. I think it makes a difference. And for me, it's another one of the many small but significant ways, if we keep plugging away at it, in which we can help. I'm taking a deep breath. Drawing on my own experience, albeit that it doesn't relate directly to prison law, perhaps one of the best examples I can think of to show how placing the individual at the heart of things can work and be empowering is what happened at Hillsborough, at the Hillsborough inquest, and again more recently at Grenfell and at the historic cases in Northern Ireland. I'm talking about pen portraits. The essence of that is that bereaved families and friends create a personal picture of their loved ones. That then is presented to the inquest or inquiry. The impacts of these personal statements cannot be overestimated. They provide a mechanism for participants who would otherwise be voiceless, save through the filter of their lawyer, to speak directly to the court and the public. They ensure that the person becomes a real person, rather than just a cipher, to those tasked with hearing the case and deciding the outcome. They become part of the case and mean that the person, as well as the circumstances in which they found themselves, cannot be expunged or sidelined. They also enable the media to take on the deceased or the individual to be challenged or at least tempered. Think about the pejorative headlines in certain red-top newspapers in the aftermath of Hillsborough, and of the thinly veiled, well perhaps not at all veiled, disdain for those of immigrant descent or background in Grenfell. Those headlines are not only inaccurate, but cause immense pain, pain that can last over decades to individuals and whole communities. Their pen portraits and memorials are a way of putting a different, and I think a fairer, truer narrative into the formal court or inquiry proceedings and into the public domain. For me, that is both therapeutic and political. I recognise that translating this directly to a prison law setting may not be easy, but it is the core of it, holding the individual in the centre and up to the light, so that the system has to remember that it is dealing with a real person. That seems to me to be something that we can at least try to keep in mind and ensure happens. I suppose when it comes down to it, and what I try to do is to create an environment where the client, the person at the sharp end of it feel secure and safe. If we can make the clients the centre, they become involved in the process rather than it just being something that is done to them or goes on around them without genuine engagement. For my part, the strength and purpose of the holistic approach is not only that it supports our clients and not only that it is a better, more sustainable way for us to work, but that in subtle ways it also plays a part in rebalancing power away from the state and back to the individual. A small part perhaps, but nonetheless one which I think is still important. I was Ben Birnberg's last trainee, and I was going through my trainee box, and I trained 100 years ago, so this was a bit strange, and I came across Inside Story, which only cost 20p, so you know how long ago that was, and you can have a look at them afterwards because they're quite interesting historic documents. But inside one of these, inside a story from 1973, there was an interesting article, and it was produced, it was in the May-June 1973 edition, and it contained a review of a report called Guilty Until Proven Innocent, produced by Release Lawyers Group, on sale for 40p a copy. The review describes the report as a dry, flat piece of writing, as readable as anything written by a committee, and then goes on to offer the following commentary. If you're a defence lawyer, you have to act on the assumption that the police are liars, thieves, thugs, and completely without scruple. At the same time, you have to cooperate with the police and the court. You have to be polite to judges who are tyrants, who will often ask you to discipline your client in court. You can refuse, but most feebly comply. I'm certain no one here would fall into the feebly complying bracket. But as for the other comments, well, I leave it for you to decide if anything has changed. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Marcia, for that. You said something about the computer saying no. I went to prison at 21. I had no previous convictions ever. I didn't even have a caution to my name. And my sister was attacked in a nightclub, and I defended it and ended up going to prison. And in that prison sentence, I ended up going to a foreign national prison, where they then told me that I would get deported back to Africa, which is where I'm originally from, but I've been here since, I think my mum recently said to me, you know, you was like 2. And I was like, oh, okay, it makes sense. But I then, got to this foreign national prison and was told, oh, well, this is where you belong because you can meet people that speak the same language as you if English is not your first language. And I thought, well, what have I been speaking all this time? So in my case, actually, the computer didn't even say no. The computer said yes. The computer said, you are British, but one individual decided that he would take it upon himself to say that I'm not British, and I guess maybe I was a bit too outspoken for him and thought, well, actually, go back to Africa then. And that's how I kind of started writing poetry, because I realized, not having a criminal background and never having experienced prison, like I ended up saying to the officer, well, you asked me to fill out a form for my meal about what I'll eat tomorrow, and then, I've gone to get it and it's not there. What's that? I mean, and she said, well, you can't talk to me like that, and then basically told me that I can get written up, which is red pen, and that is, you don't want a red pen to your name at all. And I said to her, well, she said, it's not a hotel, Brenda. And I said, I mean, if I paid for a hotel when you brought me here, somebody would have to give me my money back. Straight away, I got it written up. So I thought, you know what, Brenda? Just start writing, because, yeah, otherwise you're going to have, like, your file was just going to be red. So, yeah, I am now trying to help other people through poetry and stuff. So this piece that I'm going to perform first is called Road to Victory. And I see my prison sentence as my road to victory, even though I was studying and I was studying to be a childminder. I had I had Ofsted come to my house and they were like, oh, you're amazing. And then about 2 weeks later, I ended up arrested. And it was like, well, actually, I'm not going to tell them because, that's embarrassing. So, yeah, this is called Road to Victory. I await sentencing, scared and confused, but there's no praying. If God loved me, then I wouldn't be in this mess, that's all I'm saying. You're female with no previous, you'll get off, you've got this, so stop fretting. I hear my friends saying. Yet my solicitor's voice rings aloud. You're looking at 3 to 5, there's no doubt. So just make sure you pack a bag each time you take that stand. And still, I just can't quite understand. But the judge soon made it clear. He screamed 2.5, take her away. Take me where, I scream, but there's no sound. The water falls from my eyes, kiss my cheeks. Farewell to me trying to look hard. The life I once knew was no more. Shattered dreams and future plans all just taken in a flash. Dark shadows and angry voices in my head telling me this is the end. This is the end, Brenda, so just end it. I left a piece of me on that stand. I felt her leave as I began to walk down them steps. I swear I never even looked back. See, I had to free her from this journey that we was about to take, because she was the me with the dreams and the ambition. She was the me who still had faith in the so-called justice system. She was the me who prayed. She was that 11-year-old girl who sang in Sunday choir. She was the me who still cared about life. And all she was going to do was hold me back with her dreams of the life that we once had. Dreams I knew were just a thing of the past. Because where I was going, dreams are for the weak. Forget love, I need respect because I ain't trying to be no one's chick. Media perception of life behind bars playing through my head. Like an episode of prison's most shocking moments, my beautiful future was no more. And so I began my life behind bars, broken and defeated with no feelings. Days are long, nights are longer, weekend bang-ups feel like a lifetime. 11-year-old me, where are you? I need you, where are you? She returned to me in the form of a prayer. Not long now, girl, just stay strong. Pray to God and I promise you a better day. Pain and tears may come at night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Snap. It all of a sudden just made sense. See, this is the journey that was written for me to take, so I can teach my fellow brothers and sisters that it's not about anger, it's about peace. It's not about power, it's about grace. It's not about hatred, it's about love. These are the lessons I learned whilst in prison, so you don't have to go there to learn the same lessons. The choice is yours. I choose to be unchained. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I wrote loads of letters to my mum when I was in prison. And first of all, it was like, I really hate this place. I think I'm going to die here. And, then it became me kind of like sending her scriptures that I was reading because I kind of reconnected with my faith and stuff. So this piece is called Dear Mum. Dear Mum, I'm sorry. I know I promised to be good, but I swear this place is trying to... I'm so sorry. This piece always gets me. And it's so funny because I've made my mum sit in front of me to perform it and she's not here, but I can see her. And that image has never left me. So I'm going to come again. Sorry. Dear Mum, I'm sorry. I know I promised to be good and I swear I've been trying to hold it down, but see, this place just ain't for me. These officers are more racist than the guy who used to live down the road. The white British inmates are complaining that they ain't got enough white products on the canteen. I personally wouldn't care if they put jollof on the menu. I just want to get out of this hellhole that they tried to disguise as a centre. Did you notice I said white British? I just realised that I was different. See, this place is making me question every single part of my identity. Mum, I swear they're trying to kill me. Remember I told you on the weekends we might as well starve, see we get breakfast in the morning? Well, that's what they call it. It's 1 boiled egg, 10 tomatoes, 5 chips, you dropped one and you're pissed. And we can't even take food back to our rooms, sorry, I mean cells. I'm still trying to get used to the word cell. I feel like I'm wasting away, Mum, I'm fighting to make it through, but freedom of speech just don't apply here. I made a comment about the food and how the portions can be better. You never believe what the officer replied when he heard. He said, don't act like when you're on the out you get more food than this. As if to imply that I must not eat anywhere else but here. I must have switched, Mum, I'm sorry. But how could he just take the piss? Does my life not mean a thing? Is my skin colour too dark for them to have respect for me? Don't they see that I too have a beating heart just like them, and 2 eyes that I use to see just how much hatred they have for me? Hopefully my transfer goes through. Then I can return back to normality. Pray for me, Mum, because these people are moving mad. And I don't want to get caught up in their web of lies and confusion. You know me, I don't fight, that's the other me. I don't know how she works, I can't control her. But it's like they can see her anger through my eyes because I can feel her heat pumping through my chest. Mum, I'm not sure how long I can hold her in. I just pray this transfer comes quick. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lubia Begum Robb. I used to be one half of a job with Deborah Russo, who moved to Scotland with her family this summer after 14 years. So now I have the sole privilege of being the managing solicitor, director type person at PAS. I've been told to say privilege, not burden, so I won't say burden. Because I'm Lubia, I feel obliged to point out that everyone that stood behind the microphone this evening has been a woman. This wasn't particularly deliberate, other than coercing Marcia to deliver the lecture, but this might show you what can happen and should happen more when equality of opportunity happens for real. Thank you all so much for coming here this evening. I hope that you found it worth your while. Actually, I might go further and say that you should agree with me, because the speaker was Marcia Willis Stewart, and this woman of talent and integrity was sandwiched between 2 women of talent and integrity, and I thank you all again for this evening. And I will single out Marcia again, because she agreed really quite unwittingly several months ago to deliver the lecture out of guilt because of the 101 volunteers that she's taken from us. Admittedly to give paid work to, but I think our fundraiser's not happy that I've missed an opportunity for some commission from Birnberg Peirce. Okay, thank you. So doing the kind of work that we do is not exactly a barrel of laughs, and sadly neither are we rolling in money. So we need to remind everyone, probably more ourselves than you, of the good stuff that PAS can be happy about, even if briefly. So, for example, with the Howard League, we won a judicial review with the tenacity of people that I'd like to thank but aren't here this evening, in having some legal aid cuts completely reversed. And not too many people expected that outcome in prison law. And thanks to Julian Richer of Richer Sounds, yes, that's him, and his personal foundation, we have a new caseworker dedicated solely to taking phone calls from prisoners to bring down the number of unanswered calls to free up the caseworkers for work that we can't take on. And then, thanks to, again, Marcia, it's turning into a... We have a seconded trainee from Birnberg Peirce for 6 months, which makes a massive difference to us, because it's free work 5 days a week for 6 months. And after haggling and for years, we finally got a super duper duper grant from the Legal Education Foundation to host a trainee solicitor for 2 years. So that's 5 days a week, full time for 2 years, and we don't have to pay them. So that is going to have an extraordinary impact on our capacity and the services that we can provide for prisoners. So this brings me nicely to thank other super duper funders, individuals, trusts, foundations, big and small, really without whom PAS wouldn't exist as a charity that's the only one of its kind for adult prisoners in England and Wales. It's really nice to see some of them here. They are the main beneficiaries, we hope, of our events. I see one of them there, I can see her. I know I saw her earlier, so thank you to the Hadley Trust because they're here. Alongside money, we depend on a staggering amount of goodwill in the form of our marvellous volunteers. In fact, half of you may be our volunteers, I suspect. The barristers, the solicitors who don't charge us for their time, people like Reed Smith who've hosted this evening, give us help all year round. Last but not least, our fantastic Board of Trustees. We have as many trustees as we do staff. And I think that might be a nice way of rounding the evening off. because I think that to prove PAS is wonderful, and we attract wonderful people, the Criminal Justice Alliance realised that they should recognise our chair, the Board of our Trustees, who's also a trustee for Women in Prison. Martine, where are you? Can you stand up so people can see what you look like? So she was recognised for decades of service to people in detention who deserve a second chance at having a life again. And you'll notice that, again, I talked about a woman, and it's not International Women's Day. Before you all dash off, I'm obliged to talk to you about the twin sister of goodwill, money. So our fundraisers are really happy, they're happy that we're involved in the Giving Tuesday event, which is a global charity. I think they're trying to compete with Black Friday, but we live in hope. The event's taking place on November the 27th, and for our campaign, we're focusing on helping older and disabled prisoners who suffer as a result of inadequate healthcare treatment in prison. So you can go onto our website, or even better, you can take out your contact list, and we have one of those card readers that's floating about, only one, you can tap it. We might get carried away and get a second and third one, but I don't think we should push our luck. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving us your time. Through those doors, more refreshments and good company. Thank you again.